Our studio guest, Steve Millington. Did I get that right? Steve Millington is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. Joining us this morning on Top Story with Bill Colley. It's 28 right now, about 17 minutes away from 9 o'clock on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. There was a great line in 1984 when Walter Mondale was running against Ronald Reagan, and I forgot which one of Reagan's people, because they were coming up with slogans for the 1984 presidential campaign, and they kept referring to Walter Mondale as warmed over Carter, which I think set up the whole notion that you'd get 4 more years of Jimmy Carter if you elected Walter Mondale. Well, sometimes I look at certain Republican politicians, and in the case of the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, who says he's likely to primary Donald Trump in 2020, I think when I see Kasich, I see warmed over Jeb Bush. and, and I'll tell you why, because I think Bush was trying to attract the newspaper editors and liberals when he was in the primary season, and he was turning off the base of his own party. And I think Kasich is doing a lot of that. And Steve, what I wanted to do was share this clip. This is Kasich speaking on CNN, and he first hints and then he kind of backs away from it that he may leave the Republican Party, especially if Roy Moore wins his Senate seat from Alabama this coming December. But take a listen.
I mean, those claims are, I mean, they're ludicrous and they're divisive. And if,
let's set this up. What he's doing is he's talking about Roy Moore's beliefs.
I mean, those claims are, I mean, they're ludicrous and they're divisive. And if that's where we're headed, then, well, first of all, we can't. Remember, I wrote that book, and America United or Divided, you know, 2 paths. I'm on the path to say we can fix it. If the party can't be fixed, Jake, then I'm not going to be able to support the party, period. That's the end of it. I mean, I'm worried about our country and my kids' future. I am worried about it. But have I given up? Of course not. We're doing fine here in the state of Ohio. There are many great leaders in the Republican Party. Brian Sandoval is one that comes to mind right away. Reasonable, smart, creative, successful.
What do you mean you're going to give up on the
put out there?
What do you mean you're going to give up on the party? Are you talking about possibly becoming an independent if the Republican Party continues
No, not at this. What I'm saying to you is that we need to fix it. If our party, if the Republican Party is going to be anti-immigration, if it's not going to be worried about debt, if it's going to be anti-trade, this is not where our party can be. So I'm going to fight like everything I have to make sure. It's why I'm on these shows, because I want this party to be straightened out. But I not only want the party to be straightened out, I want the country to be straightened out.
When he mentioned Brian Sandoval from Nevada, Brian Sandoval is, I think, a pro-choice Republican.
Wait a minute here. Wait a minute here. And you know, it's interesting. I'm trying to go back here a year ago when we were having, well, it was more than a year ago. It was 15 months ago in the summertime, that when they were having the debates of all of the 15 or 18 or 29 or 50 candidates seeking the Republican nomination. And Kasich only made the big stage a couple of times, and after that he fell off into the second-tier category because he simply couldn't draw enough voter interest. And then I listen to what he's saying, and I say to myself, he is being on, quote, these kinds of shows, unquote. Those are not Republican shows. I think that was CNN.
Right.
And they have a series called...
It was Jake Tapper's show.
State of the Union, which is kind of a takeoff on State of the Union. and I, as I watched it and listened to it, yesterday, might have been Sunday evening, and then when I got your thing this morning, I looked at it again and I said to myself, you know, if Mr. Kasich would like to get out of the Republican Party, I'll help him pack his bags. He is much more of the liberal bent. He's on the far left-hand side of the Republican road, almost into the borrow pit, approaching the Democratic side of the road.
Well, what I don't understand, though, when you mentioned that, 20 years ago, I had a congressman back in my home district where I lived at the time who introduced me to Kasich. And at the time, my impression was he was a fairly conservative Republican. And I don't know what's happened over the course of 20 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, what has changed his ideologies here that's made him so much more liberal in his approach. And whoever is advising him or sending him messages is not doing him any favors. Jeb Bush was the probable candidate a year and a half ago. I mean, he had the Bush name, he had the Bush backing, he had all, except for one thing. That particular ideology, that style, was no longer acceptable to people. We had had enough of that stuff that we were not interested in going back to that kind of moderation. We wanted to see a change. So they voted for it. They got to change.
The two people who were the last standing in the Republican primaries were President Trump and Ted Cruz. And if you look at how they approach politics, it's a take no prisoners style.
Exactly.
Everybody else faded very, very fast.
They kind of disappeared off the stage. And eventually in those the last two Republican debates, you basically had Trump and Cruz standing right there. I mean, Rubio dropped out way early on. And so did many of the others. And some of them I really like. Marco Rubio, not Mar. I'm sorry. Thanks, Marco. You're a nice guy. But Ted Cruz was kind of my first choice. But when it got down to the end of it and Trump won the deal, I said, wait a minute, I'm Republican and I'm going to go with Trump. And so did many other people in this country. I remember watching election night. We had the camera or the television stations set up in our meeting room, and we were watching all these various shows. And I was watching the results come in, and then I saw a one of these streamers across the bottom of the screen, and I looked at it again, and I said, "Did anybody read that streamer there on the bottom?" And they said, "No, we're not looking." So it come across again, and at that particular point, the Dow Jones in the futures market on the Dow Jones averages was down like 700 points at that point. And I picked up my phone to call my broker, and I got cold feet. I turned gutless because I knew if Trump won that thing, that the market would not be down 700 points come morning. It would be up 700 points. And this morning, I looked, doing my little thing, I looked down on CNBC, and yesterday, the Dow Jones closed at 22.5 I think, thereabouts. And I said right out loud, we are within a whisper of 23,000 on the Dow.
GDP is at 3.5% suddenly,
and on election day, the Dow was at just under 17,000. That is a phenomenal increase in 8 months' time.
We've got about 8 minutes left in this segment. I know that we do jump around and touch on a number
that's
of
good.
things.
We probably ought to do that.
I know there's a couple other things you wanted to probably mention this morning as well.
Me? You sent me a clip that said the history of marijuana in Idaho. So I printed it off and I looked at it, and then there was what's actually going on in Idaho concerning marijuana. And this is going to become, this could be the elephant in the room, so to speak. Oh, that was a bad. Yeah, it could be the elephant in the room.
Maybe the donkey.
The donkey in the room, okay. Because the push for some form of legalization of marijuana is just overwhelming in this country. The article said that Idaho is one of the last two states that have zero medical marijuana availability. You can get medical marijuana almost anywhere. We don't have it in Idaho. We just are opposed to it.
The thing, though, they wrote this, they give me, I don't think they understand that it's being considered here, number one.
Yep.
Because the governor just said, I want it studied. But number two, they claim that the harsh attitudes here go back about 90 years out of prejudice against people coming in from Latin America.
At that point in time, they were bringing in lots of
Nobody is left from that era, by the way.
Yeah, most of them are gone,
decisions.
okay? And so their argumentation in this particular story, I read that over and I thought to myself, you guys are goofy. That was 100 years ago. Those kinds of I call it a superficial ideology. It's not really, but it's portrayed that way in their article. That's gone. We're looking at a new set of rules today. And yes, marijuana is a major issue, and yes, it's horrible. in conversations with one of the candidates for governor. Um, Tell me about marijuana. He said the only way that I think we can use marijuana is the cannabis oil, and it has an alphabet in front of it, DCO or what, I don't know what that stuff is. He said, let's refine that oil, take the carcinogens out of that oil, make sure that it is pure, and have it dispensed through a pharmacy just like any other opioid drug.
We need to point out, though, you represent a good portion of the Republican Party in this state. There are people out there who try to portray the Republicans as being cold-hearted when it comes to medical marijuana use.
Yeah,
Yet the thing is that the candidates for governor are all willing to consider this oil,
that's right.
as well as a great many Republican legislators.
The oil thing is getting some traction and gaining some support throughout the state, and so I think, and the comment that I heard was, many of the drugs that we use in pharmacology come from plants. They're not completely chemical compositions. Some of them are compounds from plants. So he said, let's take the best out of this marijuana thing, put it in the pharmacology, the pharmacists, pharmacies, and you have to have a doctor's prescription to get this stuff. Now, in conjunction with this little article that you gave me, at the very bottom of it was a question. Should the DEA, should the Drug Enforcement Agency deschedule cannabis? Yes or no? And I thought, well, this is interesting. I'll just vote. So I voted no. And then it said, would you like to see the results? And I said, well, yeah, I think intellectual honesty says I have to do that. So I pushed results. Okay, so here we are. Should they deschedule cannabis, which is marijuana? Yes, 93%. No, 7%. Now, I cannot determine whether or not this was just exclusively the state of Idaho or whether this is a nationwide program. But when I read that 93-7, I thought to myself, wow, I am in a very, very distinct minority concerning that issue.
We're going to try to squeeze in one caller very quickly here. Can you stick around through the next segment of the show?
Sure.
And Steve Millington is in our studio with us at 9:55. Caller, you're on KLIX.
Good morning, gentlemen. They blame the marijuana problem in Idaho from the Latin people that come in over here. If we went back to that type of marijuana, it'd be much more mellow than any alcohol served. But that's not what's being passed around or wanted. But I am a component of the oils that help people with seizures and everything else. I am not with a component of people trying to legalize it just so they can smoke marijuana and get high. There's a huge difference between those two, and if it's going to help some kid not have seizures every hour on the hour, I am all for it. But for them to legalize it just so they can go get high and drive on the roads, no, I'm not.
Yeah, I
That's
don't
excellent.
want to don't want to deal with that either.
I think everybody's pretty much in alignment on that philosophy. We don't need that. We just don't need that kind of stuff. But it's just, there are, take the best and leave the rest. So if there's a possibility that we can refine this marijuana down to this oil compound and have it dispensed through a pharmacy with a doctor's prescription, then that's not the best answer in the world, but it is not completely foreign to the other issuances of prescriptions for other legalized drugs.
Mhm.
So, get some tests on it, make it a legalized drug, and let's get moving with it. I'm not, I have really walked around in the windstorm and scratched my head on that one because there's a part of me that just says, no, we don't want to go there at all.
Steve's going to stick around through the next segment of the program after the 9 o'clock news from Fox. We're at 30 right now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Quickly, though, before we get to the break, you have a meeting coming up, what, next week?
Next Wednesday night. Yeah, next Wednesday night. That's correct. And is that the 11th, I think?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We have invited all of the candidates, all of the identified Republican candidates for city elections.
Right. Signs went up a few days ago.
Yeah.
You can see them everywhere.
To come to our meeting and talk to us and make themselves available for some questions and answers. So that Wednesday night we'll have, if they are registered Republicans and they're running for city office, we have invited all of them to be in attendance and give us their stump speech prior to the election.
Some of those people are my good friends. So.
Yeah. So that one will be we won't see much of this, so we don't get that kind of debate format hardly anywhere, but we're going to host one. The only criteria is you have to be a registered Republican to participate.
We've got more with Steve Millington coming up in just a few minutes following 9 o'clock news on KLIX.